Well, here in April, as we approach Easter Sunday, Resurrection Sunday, our new sermon series, as you can see on the screen, is Hope Rising. And we'll be in selected passages in the latter part of the Gospel of Luke. And to kick off this series, I thought it would be best for us to experience stories of hope. And so we just heard one, so thanks again, Hunter. But also we want to experience some stories of hope within the Scriptures as well. And that took me to a memory that I have of an experience in front of a painting in St. Petersburg, Russia. One of the most mesmerizing portrayals of the parable of the prodigal son in Luke chapter 15 is Rembrandt's 17th century masterpiece, The Return of the Prodigal. It was acquired in 1766 by Catherine the Great. It is, for the most part, resided in the Hermitage National Museum in St. Petersburg, Russia since then. I knew about this picture from a book by Henry Nouwen. And when we took a group of Belarusian and American students there in 1999, I searched out to find this painting. And I had a chance to sit, much like the person in this image, in a chair and admire it for a long period of time, partly because I was too tired to keep walking, but partly because this was an amazing picture. And of course, the scene is based on a crucial moment near the end of the parable of the prodigal son. And if you want to follow along with when we read the story, it's Luke 15, verses 11 through 32. There's a close-up here of that painting. And every time I see it, I find it deeply moving. Because I think it helps us understand the human condition that we have as sinners in great need of grace, originally designed by our God in the image of himself, but broken. And I think it also shows and reveals in a really wonderful way, it helps us understand God the Father as well. So many people want to portray God as an ogre, as capricious and mean, but instead, this great story shows us that God the Father is long-suffering and full of grace. Well, people call it a parable. Do you guys know what a parable is? I think most of you do, but I want to just give you a little bit of a different perspective on that. A parable is where you're drawn into a story in which you think you know where it's going, but usually it has some unexpected element or twist ending to it. Kind of like the TV show that ran for many years in the early 1960s called The Twilight Zone and has recently been revived by Jordan Peele, the director. The Twilight Zone always had like a twist at the end of the story that you didn't see coming. It's an effective form of teaching that our Lord used many times. It doesn't state the obvious, it gets you to state the obvious. Parables often have main characters, strong characters that symbolize or illustrate an important point. And usually there is a character who is a master or is an owner or is a father in the majority of the parables. And that's just the case here in this wonderful and very famous parable of Jesus, which has captured the imagination of countless people through the ages. But you know, we don't really use the phrase prodigal very often today, do we? And so sometimes we might be misunderstanding as to what that word means or where it comes from. Prodigal is an adjective describing someone. It has two primary meanings in your dictionary. Number one, recklessly extravagant. And number two, a condition of having spent or wasted everything. Okay? We'll say that again. Recklessly extravagant and a condition of having spent everything. And so you know where that comes from if you're familiar with the story, and I'll pause us there when we get there. Because it's very important for us as we wrestle with this beautiful story. Okay, one of the most fascinating things about Jesus, and it's important that we wrestle with it this month, is that he constantly and consistently attracted not just religious people, but irreligious folk all the time. The context of this story at the beginning of chapter 15 shows that. Among the crowds gathered around the person of Jesus were pious Jews, conservative leaders, scribes, and what is described also as tax collectors and sinners. A group who wanted nothing to do with religion and were even considered morally outcast in their society and left out. But there was something about this person of Jesus that drew them in, just like Hunter's story. The religious leaders, though, sneered at Jesus because he allowed people like prostitutes and tax collectors to be near him. Before we judge them too harshly, if you saw a religious leader hanging out with prostitutes and criminals, you might be concerned too. But in response to this, Jesus tells a series of 3 brief stories. And each one has a theme of something valuable being lost and then being found. The first one was about a lost sheep. The second one is about a lost coin. And the main story that we're going to concentrate on here is a story about not one, but 2 lost boys. Follow along with me on the screen. Here is Jesus' parable. And he said, "There was a man who had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the property that's coming to me.' And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had, took a journey into a far country, and there he squandered his property in reckless living." There's that word prodigal, by the way. Reckless living. Verse 14. "And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into the fields to feed pigs." By the way, our story is about a Jew. You see a problem there? "And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, but no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I'm sitting here perishing with hunger? I know, I'll arise and go to my father. I'll say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants.' And he rose and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son.'" Here's the twist. "But the father said to his servants, 'Bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. Bring out the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead, and he is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate." But I said that this parable was about 2 lost boys. So let's hear about the other one now. Verse 25. "Now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what was going on. And the servant said to him, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he's received him back safe and sound.' Oh. But the elder son was angry and refused to go in. So his father came out and entreated him. But he answered his father, 'Look, these many years I've served you. I've never disobeyed your command, yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours,'" notice how people will use that phrase when they're angry at a family member, "this son of yours came home, who has devoured your property with prostitutes. You killed the fattened calf for him.' And the father said to him, 'Son, you know that you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours.'" And now that's literally true because all the other parts of the property were given to the younger son. So who possesses the rest? It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this your brother was dead and is now alive. He was lost and is now found. It's a beautiful story in the scriptures. The story Jesus told is aimed at both morally religious type people who were judging Jesus for hanging around with sinners, and it was for those wanting nothing to do with religion at all, sort of like the younger son in our picture. This is represented by the older and the younger brother. I want us to talk first about the younger brother. So let's talk about what he did to his father so that we accurately get it. Because the text in the story is understated. To insist on his inheritance was the same thing as totally disrespecting his father and wishing that he was dead. That's what he was doing. I want what's coming to me, and I want it now. I'm not going to wait for you to die, old man. He was disgraceful to his father. And if that wasn't bad enough, then he went and recklessly spent all of his inheritance in short order. He doesn't know what else to do when he's at the point where he's so starving that he violates the Jewish laws and longs to just eat the pods that they feed to the pigs. So he figures, and he comes up with a scheme that he will come back to his father and ask to simply be a slave. What would you do if a son did that to you? Now, the average listener is at least hoping that this younger son gets what's coming to him, right? But there is a surprising message. The father shows his son favor, though he has done nothing to earn it. I want to say that again. The father has shown his son favor, though he has done nothing to earn it. In fact, he's done everything to deserve punishment. This is what we mean when we use the word grace. And wow, what an extravagant grace it is in light of what this younger son has done, isn't it? But the story doesn't end there. There's another brother. And a lot of times when people tell this story, they don't tell the rest of the story, which is really the main point of the passage. We know that from the context of Jesus speaking to the Pharisees. And this older son has a gripe. He publicly refuses his father's wishes, and he will not enter the banquet. In essence, he says, "How can you forgive this fool? That makes you a bigger fool." He hasn't earned anything. He squandered what was given to him. And I want what's coming to me. Compare him to the younger brother. He too is disgraceful towards his father, though he shows it in a different way. He too is reckless, but in his anger, not in his spending. He too schemes, but not to come back like his younger brother, instead to stay out. And what is the father's response? The father shows patience and invites him gently to reconsider and to enter into the feast. Now, this is a great thing about Jesus' parables. Often they're open-ended. We don't know what the older brother chose to do. What will he do? He's inviting his audience to consider, just like the older brother. So in summary, let's make sure we're getting the story right here. Both were resentful of their father. Both complained and griped to their father. Neither was close to their father's heart. Neither understood what they already had. Now, I want us to step back away from the story just a little bit. These two lost boys represent how people try to find happiness in the world. How they seek fulfillment. Now, this isn't hard. Follow along with me. One does it by running away, and the other does it by trying to earn it. You see that? But both approaches, hear me on this, both approaches are wrong. One destroys us by open rebellion. The other one destroys us by pride. It's almost as though Jesus is saying all of our lives are on one of these trajectories. And God is inviting us to reconsider. Now, if you're having trouble following this, I'm going to explain it even further. As we've said, this parable is about being lost. What does it mean to be lost according to this parable? Well, see, most of us think that being lost is failing to keep God's rules of conduct, all of his do's and don'ts of the scriptures, jumping through the holy hoops, as it were. But that is not what the story tells us. That is not what it means to be lost. Instead, I'd like you to consider the image of the Father. What does he really want from both of his sons? I'm going to give us a moment to think about that. What does the Father really want from both of his sons? The problem with both of these broken ways to fulfillment is that, in essence, they avoid the Father. Either by running away from his goodness or insisting he owes you for your goodness. Think about it. Why is the older son so angry? He's been obeying the rules all of his life, but he's been doing it in order to get things. Friends, being lost is not just breaking the rules, although it certainly includes all of that. It's not so much that we break the rules as we break ourselves against them, right? That's exactly what happened to the younger son. But it's about avoiding God and putting ourselves in his place also. What does that mean? Well, it's sort of like this. It's like going to church on Sunday and ignoring God the rest of the week. I'll have it my way, on my terms. Isn't that what these lost boys are doing? This is our society, by the way, and their understanding of what it means to be lost. When people are polled every single year by the Gallup poll why God should let you into heaven, you know what the most common response is? Over 70% of people say, I've lived a good enough life. So in essence, you're just trying to be your own savior on your own basis and on your own terms. And here's the problem. We just keep on ignoring the Father. You see? What does he really want from both of his sons? Hear this, though. Jesus isn't dividing the world into the moral good guys and the immoral, reckless, younger bad boys. He's showing us that all of us are dedicated to a project of self-salvation in different ways. One by breaking all the moral laws on purpose, the other by keeping them and thinking that we've earned it. I imagine that we have lots of younger brothers in this room, and lots of older ones too. Now here's the good news. The Father does not reject them, and he does not reject us. But he invites them both back into a feast, into a celebration, a symbol of God's care and provision. In summary, they're both wrong, but they're both loved. They're both invited into God's prodigal love. We'll come back to that. What the Father is saying in Jesus' parable is, I'm not about shows of moral superiority over others, Pharisees. Don't want to hear it. That's not at the heart of the Father. I'm not asking people to get their lives together before I love them. Instead, while his son was a long way off, he ran. He humiliated himself. But what he was saying, in essence, is that he was looking for his younger son to come back. He was waiting. He was hoping. Hope was rising. Because God's love is extravagant. He longs to care for them, to embrace his sons, to express his love to them, if only they'd stop running away and stop ignoring him. And he says the same to us. He's heartbroken for his sons. He'll do anything to get them back. He'll suffer the worst insults, and he'll be chewed out for the fact that he lifted up his robe and ran when people of his stature would never do that in the Jewish culture. He'll give up everything he has for his two sons. Literally all his possessions, which is what takes place in the story, and even his own life, if only these lost boys would be found. Now, we've defined what it means to be lost. What does it mean to be found according to this parable? When we are away from God, we are homesick. We want to be home, but our brokenness gets in the way. God takes the initiative himself to do something about it at his own cost. And he invites us to come back home. That's what it means to be found. He invites us as well, as he talks to the older son, to stop sitting on the outside judging and join in on the celebration. Come into the feast. Because he doesn't want slaves for his son, but he wants a genuine, intimate relationship. That's what he's saying. Are you homesick? Are you hungry? Now, recall our definition for the prodigal. Remember what we said at the beginning? Take a look at it again. Recklessly extravagant, having spent everything. Now, most people apply that adjective to the younger son. It's easy to see how he was reckless, how he spent everything. But if we look at the parable more closely, it applies even more to the father and the grace that he gives to each of his sons. It is the father's recklessly extravagant love, his mercy and grace, that defies our expectation here in dealing with the two lost boys. To show his love, he's willing to give all he has. He's willing to forgive. He's willing to embrace you when you come home from running. He is eager to invite you to a feast, to a supper, to the Lord's Supper.